our next speaker is a citizen of the Navajo Nation. And I realized I didn't get to really introduce myself, as I was really excited with Dr. Shea, but I too am Navajo from my mother's side and Jemez Pueblo from my father's side. I am an associate professor here at the University of Southern California in the Department of Population and Public Health Sciences in the Keck School of Medicine. And yes, much of my work is working with American Indian, Alaska Native communities, addressing many public health issues, the opioid epidemic, the commercial tobacco high rates that we have, cancer health disparities. And recently we just launched a diabetes program here in LA County. So we are trying to recruit Native diabetics, and they get free meals delivered to their home. So really exciting stuff that we're doing here. So just wanted to share with that, and excited because our next speaker is from the Navajo Nation. So we have Dr. Aresta Tsosie-Paddock. She's an assistant professor in the Department of American Indian Studies and Department of Linguistics at the University of Arizona. Her teaching and scholarly work centers and intersects with displacement and disposition from land and cultural heritage, urban American Indian studies, Diné history and philosophy, Native women, Navajo language, and American Indian law and policy. Please welcome me to have our next speaker here. Thank you.
Yat a Sheya na kaidana at what had Lini Michelin, be between the Bashashin, is Planet that should say Kiana a Dashanala, a quit ego a dene a sana Michelin. Hello, I want to introduce myself. My name is Aresta Tsosie-Paddock, and I introduce myself in the Navajo language for my relatives out there who might be not here but listening on by Zoom. And I just want to acknowledge the Indigenous people, the Native people to this area as the past, present, and future caretakers of this land, water, and cultural resources in the unceded territory of Los Angeles. So my research looks at the children of relocation, coming from a place in Arizona where there are Navajos who are impacted by a federal policy, and but specifically relocate the children who were removed with their parents as and where are they today? What is their perspectives and experiences? But as I go into my presentation at the get-go, I provide a little bit of brief background to give a context, and it is a complex issue, and it's a huge learning curve. So this slide is for our international community and scholars and those listening who are not familiar with the location of the Navajo Nation. On the left, the Navajo Nation is situated in the Southwest. It is encompassed by 4 states: Arizona, Utah, Colorado, and New Mexico. In defining the Diné people's traditional territories, the 4 directional sacred mounts consist of Blanca Peak in Colorado, Mount Taylor in New Mexico, San Francisco Peaks in Arizona, and Mount Hesperus in Colorado. To the west, located in northern Arizona, is hallowed ground to at least 13 tribes, including the Diné people, Hopi, Havasupai, Yavapais, Wallapites, Paiutes, Apaches, Acoma, and Zunis, and more. 2 more hallowed mountains at whole revered places are located in northwestern New Mexico. Herfano Mesa, where first men and first women live, George Illy, Gobernador Knob, where Changing Women has her beginnings, narrating that the Diné people's oral history is a convergence of origin, identity, philosophy, and cultural heritage. According to the oral traditions and stories and history of Diné ancestors, the Diné people emerged from within these 4 sacred mountains. With the intrusion of the Americans into the Southwest, the forced removal campaign became known as the Navajo Long Walk in 1864 and 1868. Today, we recount our oral history about family members who have gone on this long walk and are still here embodied of resilience after genocidal crusades. It has been at least 3 or 4 generations ago, not long ago, since some of our relatives participated in the Scorch the Earth campaign led by Kit Carson. The Scorch the Earth campaign equated to destroying the lives and livelihood of the Diné people, crops, livestock, homes, and elements that sustain them. My late paternal grandfather, the Tsosie, Slim Whiskers, who lived a very long life of over 100 years. The Tsosie was born as my great paternal grandparents who were returning to Diné territory after the signing of the Navajo Treaty in 1868 at Fort Sumner, known as Huelta in the Navajo language. The treaty is known as Nalsosana, translated to Elder Papers. While at Fort Sumner, the federal government had a plan to further relocate the Diné people to Oklahoma to join other tribes. A ceremony was performed that foretold that the Diné people will be returning to their homelands. It is estimated that over 8,000 Navajos were relocated and confined at Fort Sumner or Huelta, located some 350 miles from the origin point of the walk to southeastern New Mexico. The signing created a defined boundary that was confined in a rectangular shaped area. The 1868 Treaty Reservation, which encompasses 2.5 million acres, was created in tandem with the signing of the Navajo Treaty. President Chester Arthur signed off on the establishment of the 1882 reservation, as well as creating differences in hardship between the two tribes. In holding a position of power, a federal Indian agent, Fleming, was assigned to the Hopi area in 1876 and wanted a hasty resolution to the Mormon and Diné encroachment on Hopi territory to exercise his authority to eject agitators. In this case, two Anglos were helping the Hopis avoid federally run schools because of the difficult situation created by them. Fleming advocated for the Hopi reservation and threatened to resign if a reservation was not established. The powers given to the Indian agent helped advance the frontier at the expense of Native people. The premise behind the 1882 executive order was to exercise jurisdictional authority and evict non-Indian trespassers from Hopi territory. Moreover, Eric Chavitz writes, the 1882 reservation was not primarily created because of a conflict between the Navajos and Hopis, but because of a conflict between the federal government and Hopi families who were resisting having their children taken from them and to be sent away to boarding school. Both Navajos and Hopis continued to live within the area designated by the 1882 executive order, respectively, as both tribes utilized it. The 1943 Hopi Grazing Management District was exclusively designated for the Hopi and called District 6. With the creation of the District 6 exclusively Hopi, the Diné people resided in the area were required to relocate. The question of who owns the 1882 reservation was an inquiry. Not only was it an inquiry with by governments, but also folks who extract natural resources. Beneath the 1882 executive reservation order were premium coal deposits. With coal found, attempts were unsuccessful to reestablish the area as public domain in order to exploit the abundant coal deposits and support the growing urban centers of Phoenix, Los Angeles, and Las Vegas. After years of mining coal, development ceased in 2019. It is ironic how a precious metal was taken from Navajo and Hopi land to provide cheap electricity to millions of Americans so they could maintain their livelihood that carried a high social, economic, environmental cost for both tribal sovereigns. Many Navajo families continue to live without any plumbing or electricities. Both tribes depend on the royalties generated by coal mining. Although the federal government sets the terms of these royalties, it would be reasonable to say that this type of corporate capitalism is corporate welfare in disguise. The mining company received the coal at below fair market value. In addition, the mine participated in environmental degradation and decline in the health of the Diné people living in the surrounding areas that continues today. Today, the mine is closed. In attempts to resolve differences, Congress passed the Act of 1858 that allows a tribe to sue each other in order to resolve the land conflict. This paternalistic tactic further divides both tribes. The Act of 1858 led to 3 cases. To 3 cases, Healing versus Jones determined which tribe has rights and interests in the 1882 executive order. The 1962 Healing versus Jones was the primary case, where the court ruled that both Navajo and Hopi tribes have joint, undivided, and equal interests to the surface and subsurface, including all resources, thus became known as joint use area for both tribes. The establishment of the joint use area between both tribes proved impractical. Congress enacted the Navajo Hopi Land Settlement Act in 1974 to resolve the contentious issue of joint use rights by partitioning the land and relocating members of each tribe from lands adjudicated to the other. The court appointed a mediator to determine the division of the joint use area between 2 tribes prior to relocating families, resulting in the creation of the partition land, HPL, or Navajo partition land, and Hopi partition land. The relocation of Navajo is considered the largest mandated relocation imposed by the U.S. government due to the Navajo and Hopi Land Settlement Act in 1974 since the internment of Japanese Americans in World War II. Currently, these current jurisdictions post 1882 executive order reservation developed into 2 jurisdictions. The 1882 executive order reservation created under President Arthur was divided. The court partitioned and awarded lands known as Hopi partition land and Navajo partition lands to each prospective tribes. The Diné people resided mostly in the western area of the Navajo Nation, found themselves in the midst of a land settlement act that concluded in longstanding modern land conflict between the 2 tribes. Congress enacted the Navajo Hopi Land Settlement Act that passed on December 21st, 1974, 4 days before Christmas. In addition, an independent agency known as the Office of Navajo Hopi Land Relocation was created to remove both Diné and Hopi people residing in contested areas. Diné people who found themselves living on lands awarded to the Hopis were mandated to relocate as well as Hopis, as well as Navajos. Unbeknownst to Navajo citizens, some unexpectedly found themselves living on the wrong side of the fence and were subjected to forced relocation. The policy has a history of colonial imposition that continues to have long-lasting diasporic intergenerational impacts of landlessness, homelessness, language loss, and limited transmission of cultural knowledge. The population I looked at were the children of the first generation that relocated as minors with their parents, whom I called second generation Navajo relocatees, as they would be documented as such, as relocating with their parents. I have identified 5 shared criterions among the 2 GNRs meant for second generation Navajo relocatees, 2 GNR communities who were born prior to the passage of the 1974 law. They were residents with their families on the land, immersed in their cultural way of life and teaching. The land has gone through a couple of legal jurisdictional exchanges. Today, the children of relocated as minors are now adults with families who applied for so-called relocation benefits and were denied. In addition, there's lack of dedicated land base for children of relocatees to fully engage in their Diné way of life. The denial conveys invisibility and lack and non-acknowledgement. The inability to resolve this issue, as someone pointed out in one of their talks, this issue points to the lack of political will mixed with complacency by leadership. To point out relocation benefits, at some point, a Diné person will say they will relocate, they will move. So the Office of the Navajo Hopi Indian Relocation will determine if they are eligible to receive benefits, which consists of a modern home and a tiny piece of land, perhaps 1 to 2.5 acres. The language term benefit is a misnomer and a misleading term indicating that to relocate is a positive move. In reality, it is a major disruption in lives, livelihood, and culture where you are losing family, land, and home. It is an inequitable exchange. In addition, some will say this specific relocation is voluntary. However, it is a congressional mandate, thus it is not voluntary. In applying this policy to GNR, it is a very narrow, it provides a very narrow eligibility criterion. So we have these, it's under Title 25, which is dedicated to policies for American Indians. And we have, so they have to prove that they are head of household. They have to prove residency. They have to make sure they're not from a family that already received benefits. So we have this quoted by Roman Bitsui. The eligibility requirement and application process are complex, and this is in his hearing a testimony to the Senate. And and there's one citizen, Norris. He explains that the process has unfairly left thousands of relocated children in an uncertain state. Because of that, thousands of us are landless. To receive benefits, residents on December, they have to be, so what I call here is the exclusionary principle based on the policy. So one, they have to prove residency in December 22nd, 1974. Yes, they can do that. Can they prove resident and head of household status? No. So they're not entitled if they are part of a household that received benefits. So therefore, they were part of a household that received benefits. So therefore, they're not entitled. And so basically, as a dependent minor who is not head of household status, that was part of a household that receives benefits. So basically, they're voided out. So this historical, so this is a historical exclusion of rights. And then we have both another citizen who indicates the process of applying for relocation benefit was not bad, but when you hear you are denied, it is sickening. It makes my heart heavy. While awaiting a decision, I was hopefully to hear something positive, but again, I received another denial letter. I was even crushed even more because I'm the one who lived there. For the relocatee who never got a chance to get benefits like us, it is disappointing. So this points to having no land and being homeless on the Navajo Nation. So here's slide 10, data. This data has slides for 2018, but not much has changed since that data has come out. Perhaps a few additional numbers. I'm not a statistician, but I would like to note that in this regard, and this is furnished by the Office of the Navajo and Hopi Indian Relocation, that 99.5% of those impacted by this law that are documented are Diné people. This slide, okay, so here we have a slide of a paradigm or a framework that I created called Land-Centered Connectivity Paradigm. So in the first, what this indicates is that land is essential. Land is essential for livelihood. Land is essential for ceremonial cycle, language, and sacred history for one to practice their personhood as a, in this case, as a Diné person. And so here we have some of the quotes. We try and teach the culture so much off the reservation. Telling story is all it becomes. So we need to be there on the land. We need to keep our way of life. Another one, and these are all from second generation Navajo relocatees. And I never pass my language to my kids. It's a big impact. Maybe you don't speak Navajo every day. Sometimes you just say a word here and there. For Navajo people, land is who we are as a people. It is who we are. It's where our roots are. It's so important to have land. People had sheep, people had land, people had cattle, people had lives. My grandparents had their cornfield and they had their sheep. My other grandma had their whole homestead and her cornfields there. To practice the religion on a piece of land we call home is difficult now. in order to practice our faith, it comes with land because of Mother Earth. All these connections to the land, and it's not there. So here, in my report to our leaders, the harms are exclusion caused by the policy, the lack of land and home, and the just knowing has a social impact of our knowledge of our relatives, as well as the cultural, the language, the ceremonies, and then the mental impacts. And it does cause mental harm as, you know, as a group, and but also infiltrates into you know, the non-practice or the lack of practice, the lack of a land base, leading to these harms. So thank you.
And say thank you for your really informative talk. I often apply a lens of violence against women on different topics, and I'm just wondering, I sometimes get uneasy when I hear the term head of household. I remember once in the hospital, I had to fill out a form, and they asked that question, and I said, my household has no head. You know, and so it would depend if you have a matriarchal or patriarchal culture, but are there ever issues that come up where maybe the head of household would be a man who was maybe hurting people and then got the claim and then left, and so the women and the kids are left with nothing and they can't make a claim because the head of the household took the money or the house, the new house, and split?
Yes, there are situations in that scenarios you brought up. I think, you know, this really has shattered a specific population of the Diné people, and I can't even begin to phantom what families might have gone through. And that is a scenario where maybe the head of household is a male, and maybe he left and the children, or maybe he, you know, the wife and the children had to leave. And so often I think we see scenarios where the families, before they relocate, are really overwhelmed by this and not thinking really ahead, because, you know, one of the tactics was, in my case, my parents, they were told that they would not receive benefits if they did not relocate. So that was, so they were fearful of being left with literally nothing, losing the land, losing everything they built up. I mean, we had a couple of homes, and we had a cornfield, and they had cattle, they had sheep, and if they wanted to get supplies, they just had to go to take the animals to the market and so forth. And for them to be transplanted from, and they didn't speak English. And so for them to be transplanted into Western society and know nothing about taxes or insurance or homeowners, the HOA rules and so forth. I think you had some Navajo families that were faced with that. But and also, I think in the beginning of the relocation, maybe there wasn't really a place for them to go to except off the reservation. But later on, there was one community called Newlands. And so Navajo families had the opportunity to go there. But there again, you have it kind of follows on the route of an area where it was impacted by the Churchill uranium spill. And so it's I guess, quote unquote, marginalized land. So it's, yeah, so this, I think undertaking this research has been really helping the people. And in my case, you know, I got my PhD, and it doesn't belong to me. It belongs to the people. And I was really curious and really wanted to find out more about who are the children of relocation, because no one talked about them. And it was like they were invisible. And even if you did ask, they would not talk about it because it was so painful. And so it's been quite a journey. Mhm.
Thank you for a powerful and very informative talk about an extremely important issue. I have a question, which is, what is the relationship between this current struggle and ongoing coal and uranium extraction?
Okay. Okay. So coal, yeah, it's been closed, you know, of course, you're probably aware of the water situation along the Colorado River, and parts of it's been close to dead cool, right? So that's been closed. So I'm not sure what the situation is right now with both tribes, but it would seem that they no longer receive royalties from the coal. Uranium, that's still a struggle, because we do have Superfund sites, and we have families living in those areas. And so that's still an ongoing discussion and ongoing implementation to clean up these uranium sites. And was there one more additional? No, okay. Thank you.
Thank you for sharing. I had a question about the families and the second generation that relocated on their own and were outside of the joint use area prior to the allocation of benefits and the application process. So I know of a number of families who, you know, they went to Alamo or different places where other family was. Is there any potential or possibility that they are considered in that application process for benefits?
Well, you did see a number there, and you did see another category that indicated if they lived in District 6 and they went into the federal government's office to apply, then there would be documentation that they applied. Some families had moved into different parts of communities, host communities, and some moved off the nations. So it's like I said, it really has shattered communities, families, and yeah. So yes, in Alamo, you know, a place would be an area they would, you know, move to on their own. So, I hope I answered your question. I tried my best.
Yeah, I just want to echo my thanks for the research that you've done is so excellent and so important. And I hope it has furthered more conversations, because oftentimes the research can affirm and acknowledge things that families have been feeling, like that harm that has been unrecognized. So I think your research is really important to give voice to what I'm sure a lot of families have been experiencing. So I just congratulate you for that. And I hope that more work comes out of it to try to restore some of the harm that's been done to the people. And my question is, I went to law school at the University of Arizona quite a few years ago. I did my master's down there, and we had a tribal law legal clinic where we would go into communities in and around Arizona to try to help with economic development or land issues. And I didn't personally go up to the Navajo Nation but several of my colleagues did. And I know that at that point, so that was like close to 20 years ago. And they'd come back talking about the tension between the Navajo and the Hopi and things that should be done or not done, not talked about. I'm just wondering if it sort of falls outside the scope of your research, but what is the relationship between the Navajo and the Hopi people?
Well, to begin, my grandfather, he has a Hopi family, or my paternal grandfather, from what I was told. And there are many relocatees who have intermarriages between Navajos and Hopis. And we don't really hear from the community, but I think it's a government level where the dissension seems to begin. And I think we know that relocation has happened. We know this law is still in place. We know that folks are, still trying to fit into the situation, but it's not working. And so the children, what happens to the second generation? Now we're looking at third generation Navajo relocatees. And also their children, they're probably like tiny by now. So this is an intergenerational impact that we are seeing, and this is a contemporary form of American Indian removal and relocation. Also, it's created there's other tentacles that has been, example, there's a place called the Bennett Freeze in Western Navajo Nation where Navajo families, they weren't relocated, but they were somewhat held hostage because they couldn't fix their windows, their doors. You have multiple families living in one's house because they didn't want them to improve anything until the relocation was resolved, or quote unquote land dispute was resolved. So, but that's been lifted, and yeah, in other scenarios as well.
Thank you.
I too just want to commend your work. This is just really very important for just the history and things that have happened to our communities. And so, it just made me think, just to the question, the gentleman in the back with the uranium mining, I still will give talks of just that history of the extraction of uranium in our lands and how they blew up Mother Earth so they can extract that for the Cold War and World War for nuclear weapons, and they still want to come back because there's still high deposits of that in our communities in Navajo Nation. So there's just so much going on, all the environmental injustices. And so even this that's happening definitely deserves that attention as well, where there's just so much complexities in the intertwine of all these and how it impacts our families as we try to maintain and preserve our traditional way of life, right? For
Right.
many of our communities. So I just wanted to say thank you for your great work.
Well, thank you. I'm really honored to be among scholars from all over the world, and I really appreciate your research and your presentations, and just it's been wonderful to be immersed. Thank you.